speakers, and that's Matthew Agnew, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Blueprint Software Systems, and is I just say Blueprint, but Blueprint Software Systems is the technical name, and he's responsible for understanding the challenges the businesses face when automating their processes, and then articulating that real-world problem into the rest of the Blueprint team. Everyone knows what a critical role that is, to be the interface between the business and the inside of the company. Matthew Dodgson, we have Matthew and Matthew today. I'm going to let them sort out how to determine which one we say to who. Matthew Dodgson is the Director of Solution Engineering at Blueprint and has developed a deep knowledge of what businesses need when they want to improve their RPA processes, which of course is so critical in accelerating those processes, and uses that knowledge to support enterprise clients around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the stage and the screen over to Matt, and I'll let Matt decide who's going to talk first. Thank you, guys. I'm looking forward to it. Take care.
Thank you very much. And just making sure here, are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
I can see your screen.
We're all good. Great. So thank you very much, Summit attendees and watchers and listeners, for joining us today. And thank you, Chris, for that great introduction here. So Matt, these are the Matts here. They're going to be talking to you this morning, and we'll make it easier. Everybody at Blueprint is named Matt. It just makes it easier, and we all wear blue. So I just want to give everyone a quick understanding of why we're here talking to you today. So as in the product marketing role, the first thing that I need to do is understand the challenges in the market, understand what people are facing, what the problems are, and then how we can go about helping people solve those problems. And Matt's role is that he, day in and day out, talks to people that are coming to him with challenges and looking for solutions. So we have a lot of experience talking to different companies of many different sizes here, and we just really want to thank you for giving us the time to share that knowledge that we have with you guys. So as Chris mentioned, Blueprint is a software company, and the best way to describe Blueprint is that we're here to help you improve work, help you improve your processes from many different angles. And one of the first things that we want to talk about today is I want everybody here to take a few seconds and think about what are the state of your processes now. If you think of all the processes across your organization, whether they are automated processes, manual processes, outsourced, and think about where you are right now. From our experience, we typically find that companies fall in one of three categories. First is that they are emerging. They have some automation, they're doing some RPA practices, maybe they have 3, 4 bots that are doing a few things now. They have looked into companies like UiPath, they are evaluating things. They're getting bigger with how they are looking at their processes. The second one we see, and really still a very common one, is the maturing one. These are people that have been automating for several years, that probably has a dedicated RPA team or RPA practice, maybe 50 to 100 bots or more around there. And RPA is a big thing that they do, and they promote the use of RPA within their organization. And the last one we typically run into is the mature organization. These are companies that have an automation center of excellence in place, and they might also have a dedicated process improvement team or a process analysis team, and they do a lot of process analysis as well. So look at these three circles and try to think, throughout the remainder of our presentation, where do you fall here? And regardless of where you are in these three circles, one other thing that we have really seen a lot of is this concept that we're calling automation overload. And really what's happening is that I would say when RPA really started getting big, people really got excited about it and they started automating everything. And I know, Matt Dodgson, you've seen this as well, right? Where companies, and what are some of the problems that you've typically seen that where people are kind of doing this concept of automation overload?
Yeah, a lot of it is kind of forcing the technology to sometimes do things it's not designed to do. We see this with just, there's a few major and just quite a selection of automation platforms and tools you can go with. And some of these tools work better in different situations and with different technologies and systems. And we sometimes, see people taking automation as a hammer and they just see everything as a nail. And they just try to hit everything and they try to automate as much as they can, which is a very noble idea, but it's really about understanding, is it the right process to automate? Is it actually the right technology to use at that time to actually turn that into an automation? And are you going to get a continued ROI, or are you going to sink all your ROI into a maintenance budget of now trying to keep that automation running?
Exactly, exactly. You know, it's like the concept. Imagine in your house, all of a sudden you decide that you really love plants, right? And you buy a plant, and then you buy another plant. You keep buying plants, and it's great. Everything's there, but then, you know, you want to go on vacation and no one's there to water it, or you're realizing how long it takes to water it, or the maintenance it takes to buy plant food, and you got to trim your plants and make sure they have the right sunlight. So it's, you know, no one thought of doing anything poorly here. It was a great idea, automation, but there's a couple problems that happen. And a couple things that we've seen with customers and prospects that come to us is a big one here, automating processes that don't need to be automated. Again, people just got excited, right? They're like, oh, let's automate that. And what happens is it costs more than they think they're saving, and they don't realize that right away. That's a really common thing with people that are in one of those first two circles, the emerging or the maturing, where they're like, yeah, I automated this, it's great. But nobody really looked and said, should that have been automated in the first place? Another thing that we see is when we don't properly evaluate the cost of the automation up front. A lot of times we believe this is happening. You know, I spoke to a very large Canadian organization where they believe that they're doing this really thorough review to justify the cost of the automation. And really what they're doing is they're looking at how much time it takes for an individual to do this now, and then how much time they think they'll save, and then they equate that to $1. And then they go, great, and then they automate a process, and they go, and they're really happy, and they high-five each other, and then they take that automation and they send it over to the development team, and they never think about it ever again. And what's happening is they didn't fully evaluate two main things. They didn't evaluate the maintenance cost fully, and they didn't evaluate the licensing cost fully. And again, sometimes, you know, a bot is a person, right? A digital worker, and they need to have access to all these things. And sometimes the cost that it takes to build this is a lot more than our savings. And when we don't evaluate that properly up front, we run into excessive spending later on. Another problem is not optimizing a process first. You know, as Matt said, people got excited with this, and they're jumping into process automation and not looking, you know, is this the right process first? They're just taking it exactly how it exists and automating it. No one's saying, can we shave a couple hours off this, or what are we doing with this process? Big one here, not aligning a process to your strategic business goals. Again, think of your own organizations for a second. I imagine all of you right now can think of something in your organization that gets done. Maybe you do it yourself or something on your team. And if you stop and think about it, why are you doing this? Is it just something you've always done? Is it something a former manager that's not there anymore asked you to do? Is it aligned with your goals? And that's a really common thing where this work gets done and no one's saying, should we be doing this in the first place, or should this work be tweaked to better suit what the business needs? We mentioned this earlier, not factoring your maintenance costs into your success criteria, a big one here and a hard one to manage, but sometimes these bots have really high maintenance costs after they're live. And they're getting stuck on legacy systems. This is a big thing that we see as well, where people are using software that they've been using for years, and they have a big, huge deployment of it, and they want to start looking at other things. So they want to start looking at UiPath or Microsoft Power Automate, or even new versions of older software. And they just look at it and they say, oh, I have so many automations on this platform, it's not even worth moving. And then you're not getting the return that you could be getting. Mm-hmm. So what is this causing for a business? Why does this matter? Why are we here today listening to the Matts talk about this? One is business waste, right? When the wrong process is getting done, or you're doing redundant work, you're losing money. I've heard from a couple different sources, you know, big solutions integrators and analysts in the space, roughly 20 to 30% of your automated process landscape is redundant. And I know, Matt, I think you had some firsthand knowledge talking to companies where they find a good chunk of their portfolio of automated processes is redundant, correct?
Yeah, we work with a few very large companies that have essentially these huge estates of things like automation anywhere processes in the order of, you know, 3,000 plus ATMX files, and in analyzing that entire estate, we found, you could see 400 to 500 of those processes were just redundant. There was something as simple as copy and pasting problems and copy and pasting errors, or they have multiple processes that might have different names, but they're doing the same thing. So we found that, that's very true when you really start looking hard at these large estates, and any estate you're starting to build up organically over time.
And think about what that means for a second, 20 to 30%. So 1 in 5 of your automated processes aren't doing anything. So think about that. That's a huge problem, right? If for those of us that don't have that many, we might think, okay, but we all want to grow. We all want to grow this practice, and just imagine that at some point, if you continue on this path, you're going to have 200, 300 processes that aren't doing what you think they're doing. And that's a huge, huge problem. That's a massive waste in time, effort, and resources. Obviously, this all leads to lost money. When we have these high maintenance costs and bot outages and these excessive licensing fees, we're spending money that we don't need to be spending. Again, of 1 in 5 of these processes that all have access to systems that have an Active Directory license and access to your ERP system and access to your marketing software. These are licensing that you're using that you don't need to be using. And really, again, what it's all for is we want to reach our goals. The business has something they want to do. Your business wants to move into new markets. They want to expand into new areas, introduce a new product line, make more money, right? And everything that you're doing on the process side should be lining up with this. But when it's not, it's really going to be causing you some problems. So don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. I know we've been dooming and glooming a bit this morning, and it's a bit cloudy out of my window here in Toronto. But let's talk about how we can get better. And before we can talk about how we get better, why did this happen? And really, it's what Matt and I were talking about. People got really excited. And if we think of this concept of improving work as a linear goal, we start here, we end here, people jumped in way too far on the path, right? They were kind of cheating a bit, right, in the race. They were jumping in, oh, let's automate some stuff. But really what they should have been doing is taking a step back and looking at process improvement and process analysis first. So how can we continue to do this, and how can we improve? So there's a few things that we can do. One thing is consolidation, and it's this idea of looking at all of your processes in one location. RPA tended to be a very siloed process when it first started. One department was using it, then another started using something different, and that's great, but it really leads to a lack of the right information that helps you make good decisions. So you need to have the ability to look at everything in one spot. Next, we need to not allow that siloing to continue to happen. It was good that your finance team moved forward with a UI path or whatever, and they automated some stuff, but everyone needs to be doing the same thing, and it needs to be managed by a central department in your organization, or you're going to keep running into these problems. You're going to keep having these redundancies and these processes that don't line up. And also, let's just learn, right? If one department is doing it well, let's do it somewhere else. Optimize. Let's continue to look at our processes. It's not all about automating it. Maybe we just shave an hour, shave a day, shave a week off something that someone's doing right now. Like, it doesn't always have to be an automated process. And then, of course, modernizing. Let's use the best technology available. Just because you have a bunch of bots on a system doesn't mean you can't look at something else and move forward. Like, don't be scared to think, I need to be moving forward to another system. There are ways. So in just a few seconds, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Dodgson, who's going to show you, there's a lot of me talking now, but Matt is going to show you how Blueprint is designed to do what we're showing here. So everybody can leave here with knowing that there's another option out there and there's some other ways that can help you improve. And this is all about doing what, this is really what Blueprint wants to help businesses do, right? Have this consolidated view, identify your bottlenecks and waste, reduce this excess that's happening, and really be able to develop new processes faster, all while working together as a company. So this is really how Blueprint works. This is a quick visual representation of it, and it's really what we just talked about, taking what you're doing now on the left, putting it into Blueprint in the middle, analyzing it, and then making some decisions to get better. And those decisions typically fall under modernizing, optimizing, standardizing, or automating. and then we put it back into our work through a variety of ways. So that was the very quick 5-second view of how Blueprint works, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt Dodgson, who's going to give you a view and demo of how it works. So just bear with me a second here if I remember how to do this. So
we're putting Matt on the spot.
Yeah, all right. I think I did it here. I just made you the presenter.
I think you did as well.
You have the power, sir.
Hopefully you can see my screen. Let me know once that comes up here.
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. So I appreciate everyone's time today, and thank you, Matt, for that kind of context. And so what we wanted to do is show you a bit of how Blueprint really helps with these kind of, let's put it in 2 simple buckets. One is helping you understand the work that's getting done, and then the second is helping you improve that work or make an improve or action on that improvement strategy. So what you're seeing on your screen is Blueprint. Now, Blueprint is a web-based solution. It's cloud hosted. Can be hosted by us, can be hosted by customers and their own sites on-premise, whatever is needed. And this, again, the whole idea is to give organizations back this ability to understand the work that's getting done in a variety of ways. So today, I have a process that I want to analyze and understand. Specifically in this case, I have a process. Oh, let me actually pull it up here. I have an automated process that's running in Automation Anywhere. This is I would say a medium complexity automation that runs reports from Excel and spits them out to a general location. But we don't know exactly how this process works. And this is a common thing with any processes that get run today, especially in the automation world, because a lot of these processes get understood and then they get built up, and then we have this repository of processes that kind of take care of themselves until they don't, until they break, and we have to go deal with them. So what Blueprint does is we help you first analyze and understand your process and your work today. And we do this by ingesting it or pulling into the system. So what I mean by this, in this case here, I'm actually going to import from Automation Anywhere. And you can see I can import from a variety of places, whether it's process information in traditional formats like Word, Excel, and Visio, whether it's more modern platforms like automation platforms, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, UiPath, or even process discovery tools. Here, for example, I have one from Fortress IQ. But at any rate, what we're doing is we're going to take that information. In this case here, we're going to take a package of all of the raw code, the ATMX files, and we're going to pull it into Blueprint and turn into what we call digital blueprints. And a digital blueprint essentially is a way to take that process and understand it in a consistent format that we have in Blueprint that helps us analyze and interpret not just the file as a whole, but the individual steps, the individual commands, in this case, because it's an automation process, the individual commands and systems that are being executed on this step. So why is this significant? It means that when you want to understand a process that's being done today, usually you have to deploy a manual worker to go and understand that, either look at code, read through diagrams, read through images. What we're doing here is actually digitizing all of that information into a consistent format that we can then report on and provide detail, as you'll see here, in minutes, as opposed to the days or potentially a week or weeks that it could take for someone to go through and understand those processes. So let me just do a quick refresh. So here is the automation or the process that we pulled into Blueprint, that we've sucked in. Now, before we decide what we want to do with this, we need to really understand what this process does. So we're going to use Blueprint's reports and this dashboard that's built into the system to give us some context and detail. And I'll explain at a high level what you're looking at. But at the click of a button, what this is doing is this is telling me exactly what this process does. It tells me in this case here, and this is very common with automations, how many flows or processes are part of that entire automation, how many steps or actions that is actually taking. So in total, this is about 500 steps. So it's a fairly, let's say medium complexity, medium-sized automation. And then it starts to give me a breakdown, the average number of elements, the maximum number of elements. And these become very important because in working with companies, we've actually established some industry baselines that really help you understand specifically for things like automations, hey, are we building these automations too complex? Are we taking what's called a micro-tactical approach, meaning we're building each section of this automation to be independent and consumable, but not too complex? I can tell you in this case here, a threshold for some of the baselines is usually around like 150 steps. So anything above 150 starts to get more complex. And in other words, starts to cut into the ability to maintain, and ultimately starts to cut into the ability to deliver that high ROI. So when you see something like a number like 320 steps, that becomes suspect. And again, that can start to point to a way to optimize your process, in this case here, as, hey, we might want to refactor that particular ATMX file, that particular flow, to be more effective and more efficient. And we do this analysis not just on the size of these automations, but also on the complexity. This graph here on the left-hand side is giving you a basic scoring around how we've scored, and this is a calculation we do and we pull it in. We score the complexity of each process, and we tell you, hey, if it's above something like 20, it's actually in a range of high complexity. And that, again, is going to cut into the ability to maintain and drive high ROI. If it's above something like 50, it's extremely high, and you should definitely consider refactoring. And so this analysis, and I'm giving you a detailed dive here quickly to really help you understand that the work that gets done today is tricky to understand, especially when you are deploying manual people to go through, manual effort to go through and understand it, because you can only understand each process one at a time. With Blueprint, we can pull in not just a single process, but an entire suite of processes, whether it's automations, manual processes, and we can do this analysis and really start to get a sense of, okay, with all of this understood, where do we have problems? Where do we need to invest effort? And then to our second point, how can we improve these processes? In this particular example here, what we're going to do is we actually want to look at maybe modernizing this legacy. This is a process that runs on Automation Anywhere V11. And we actually want to move internally, we want to move over to something like Microsoft's Power Automate Desktop. Well, one of the things we've done in Blueprint is not only provide you the ability to, or provide the ability to help you analyze that process and that automation, or that work, if you will, but to start giving you a sense of, hey, how well is this going to be able to be modernized or re-platformed? So we actually start to give you a score and a percentage around moving to more modern platforms, something like the Power Automate Desktop platform or UiPath. In this case here, you can see this actually has a mapping percentage of 97%. Behind the scenes in Blueprint, because we've broken down these automations into a very granular set of steps, we understand what those steps are, and we understand how those steps map into different RPA platforms, different technologies. And so we actually can give you a score, and then from that score, you can actually decide, hey, this is a good candidate to move over. And it helps you in actually re-platforming. So in this case here, what I intend to do is I'm going to take this particular automation, and what you're seeing here is the actual digital blueprint, is a simple graphical representation of that process. And just so you guys see what I'm talking about, every step in this gets broken down and decomposed into the detailed granular pieces of the actions, the commands, and the systems that are being interacted with. So this, what we call common object model, is kind of a generic RPA language that we built as a sort of translator in Blueprint. So again, this is one of those optimization or improvement strategies that we've built into Blueprint. And what this all means is we can not only understand this automation, but then we can turn around and in the same breath, in the same day, in the same hour, I can actually export and push this entire automation over into, for example, Power Automate Desktop. That will package up all of the that process that was kind of harvested and pulled out of Automation Anywhere. It will rewrite that in the format, syntax, and structure and commands of something like Power Automate Desktop. And in doing so, it actually, let me pull this up here quickly. It actually will export it over into my Power Automate Desktop environments. And what you're going to see here, just a quick rundown, is it's actually rewritten that entire process flow, that entire automation in a Power Automate Desktop structure. It's turned it from ATMX files into a main flow with subflows. It's translated all of the variables. It's translated all the selectors, all the commands, and anything that isn't compatible, because you saw in that example it was about a 97%, so there's a 3% difference between those two platforms. We provide a report, we provide some details that help the developers now, in this example, go in and actually fix the remaining steps. And so these efforts, this effort here, organizations are going through things like replatforming initiatives. A lot of them are just, jumping in feet first into the deep end with cement shoes on and trying to swim. They're trying to just pick up all of the automations and move them over as quick as they can. What we're showing here is a more measured and calculated approach, where the first step in any improvement strategy is to analyze and understand what you have. So you can prioritize it, you can figure out what you have to do before you want to action and what your choices are. In this case here, when we want to improve, we can actually use that analysis to tell us which of these automations is going to re-platform easily, which of them is going to convert and be supported well in the new technology, which might not have compatibilities, and which we might want to improve before we even do any of that re-platforming. For example, if you had an incredibly complex process, you might want to do some refactoring before you did that, or you might want to include the refactoring as part of that re-platforming effort. And so I want to wrap up here, but this is really to give you an example of how that analysis drives the improvement. And I leave you with one final thought here, where over time, this analysis I showed you today is just around one process, one automation. What you're looking at in this example here is an entire repository where we are starting to not just pull in one type of automation from one particular system, but we see it a very common thing today in organizations in the landscape, where there is multiple technologies, there are multiple automation approaches, multiple approaches to processes, whether they're manual, whether they're Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, Power Automate Desktop, UiPath. I've seen organizations that have all of them and then still write their own custom automations. Blueprint becomes a central consolidated view for all of that information and allows us to provide a consistent view of understanding, and even help us monitor and centralize all of that information so that we can action on how we improve those processes and keep our business running the most efficient and most effective way it can. And with that, I will pass it back to Matt.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. And that's really what we had for you guys today. So looks like we have a little bit of time here for some questions. So please use the question feature here. And we definitely have some time for that. So Chris, thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Hopefully you can. I have heard you guys present different versions of this, and every time I learn something, which tells you that this is a complex, important subject. So I have a question for you. It feels like you're balancing, and yes, I'm building on one of the written questions that I've got in front of me that someone asked, but I'm as deep in this tribe as you guys are, I think, in many ways. I feel like there's two things there's many things, but two things that I want to think about. One, someone is where they are today and they say, well, we want to get better, so we're going to just throw out our RPA tool and start over. There's a school of thought, right, that says that. And then there's another school of thought that says, that's a crazy idea and there's too much going on with that. So we're going to figure out how to optimize and work with our processes with the existing tool we have up until such point that maybe it then makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started in RPA, it was about 2015. So RPA was very new at the time, as you guys know. So can you guys talk to me about that? There you're an operations lead, you're a process lead, and you're looking at the two choices. What do I do to my processes other than throw out my RPA tool? And when does it come time to say, time to change RPA tools?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit here. And I think there's a third thing that happens as well. And I think Matt's experience as well is that it's so complicated that we just talk about it for 6 months to a year and we do nothing. Just the hard reality of it, where it's people, they talk to vendors, they talk internally, and then nothing happens because they think it's so impossible to do anything. Because like we're in this mess here, right? Where we have 5,000 automations, and I'm talking about very large companies. We have no idea what they are. We have no idea, if they're efficient. We have we're not really sure what to do. So there's a third one as well of the let's just be sad and do nothing. But Yeah, and I think, you know, we talk to a lot of people that are in that second bucket you mentioned, where I do want to move forward. And really what we hope that this session provides is just letting people know that there are other options, right? So it doesn't have to be as hard as you think it is. So I don't really think you need to throw out everything. I don't know, Matt, what you think about that. Like, I would recommend not, because it's still valid work that you did. So I think it's really about that analyzing what you have first. Like, let's take a look. Like, that should probably be your first project, is let's take a look at what you have before you do anything. And let's just see, okay, what do we have? What's working? What's not working? What do you think we can save? What can we retire? Right? Matt, what do you think on that subject?
Yeah, so what I've seen is organizations have a lot more useful data and intellectual property than they realize. Take for example an existing set of automations that you're kind of looking at these two, I would call them hyperbolic options of, you know, I'm going to throw out the baby with the bathwater and start from scratch, or I'm not going to do anything until the whole thing rusts to a halt and the machine has to be just scrapped and rebuilt. And what we've seen is that actually those options are two extremes, because you don't have understanding of your data, of your intellectual property. And that's really where we come in for a lot of these customers. They say, listen, before you go in and try to hypothesize about these two very catastrophic scenarios, why don't you actually look? Do you know what you have? We think we know what we have. We kind of know what we have. The reality is people don't know how work gets done. And that's a very therapist sort of on the couch situation when you're like, well, I kind of know stuff gets done at the organization. I don't know exactly how. And we want to go to this, you know, a cloud update next week and next month, but we don't know how much it's going to rip through all our processes. All these challenges are because of a lack of visibility and a lack of understanding. And that lack of understanding is really this analysis phase that we come to with every organization, saying, before you go and jump into the deep end of either one of these situations, wouldn't it be better to understand what you have? And the reality is, it's probably a mix of the two. There's a lot of organizations that are doing things like they are rebuilding parts of their automations because they don't know what they have. But in some cases, they should rebuild parts of them anyway, just because of there's an improvement process and there should be some ways to improve them. We help organizations do that. At the same token, there's some of those automations that should just be left on those old platforms and should be retired, and should be other initiatives taken up in parallel. But both of those decisions should be based on understanding what we have today and how things work and how things operate.
So you just pointed something out that I want to say that I've experienced, and I'd love to be able to ask everyone who's listening if they've experienced this. You're in an organization and you're having a big debate what to do. Should we tweak? Should we adjust? Should we go to a new thing? Or there's this big debate. And what you just described is what's usually missing in the middle of that debate. I think of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. There's a famous scene. There's a debate between these two people, the classicist and the romanticist. And in the case of this example, it's the person who just wants to buy the brand new thing, have the right thing. In that case, it was a BMW part. And the other person who says, we can make this work with a minor adjustment. But if you don't know where you are, if you don't know what the state of the business is, which you just so clearly described, right, then you're having a debate almost from philosophical opposites, which never gets anywhere, right? If it's a debate from philosophical opposites and you don't even know what the true situation is, how do you resolve it?
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting that Blueprint is Zen in the art of RPA, but maybe it is. maybe that helps bridge the gap between those two conflicting points of view. Okay. Well, let's see. We got some more minutes. Did you want to say something about that point?
No, I was just saying it's very accurate. It's a very common thing where the reality is somewhere in the middle, and you have to take an evidence-based approach in today's world.
I love that, and it certainly calms the debate down, which leads to a next question I want to ask. And this question is actually, you can read into what the person is thinking when they ask this question, right? What roles do you typically see IT playing in the process improvement space? Which clearly, by definition, whoever wrote that is saying to themselves, hey, there's some conflict here on the IT role, right? So what are your thoughts about that, the role of IT on the process improvement space? As a former Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, this is totally my world, so go.
The role of IT in the process space, we see it a lot in automation. It's really forced the issue of where do automations get developed, inside, outside of IT. We see a lot of the operational and the support side of how do you keep these processes in the automation world running. That is still firmly falling in an IT center of excellence sort of role. So as much as you can have this kind of distributed citizen developer federated model, all roads lead to Rome, right? Everything comes back to there's a technology group that is going to own and run this. And this is common in every organization at any stage of their evolution and life cycle. Early on, it can be very federated, but very quickly, once it grows, it needs to kind of organically converge on a group and a team. So we commonly see IT, the role is, usually the gatekeeper and the housing of those automations and those processes. And when it comes to improvement, they're usually the first to signal or need to be kind of have the tools at their disposal to show, hey, these changes are going to have this huge impact on your processes that you depend on that you're not aware of. So sometimes they're the people holding the flare gun trying to make people aware, and we're usually involved in trying to give them tools and the ability to do that analysis on running process.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, if you think of a large company, picture a large company with a CIO, and excuse me, and typically, if you ask a CIO a few questions, they know their high-level strategy of, like, they know their server strategy, their cloud strategy, their support strategy from a high level. They know their telephone strategy. They're what they're using, Microsoft or Gmail. They know those things, and even more now so. And it's really important that they also know their process analysis and improvement strategy and RPA strategy. So it's, they have to have a strong understanding of that. They might not be the ones hitting the buttons, but it's becoming almost as important as the other things I mentioned, right? Where that it's such an important part of your business that if you're a big company, your CIO should have a good understanding of your process analysis tools and your RPA tools and what's going on there.
I'd like to actually get your thoughts on this. In the 1950s to 1960s, across the global auto industry, a major realization took place, and it went like this. Why are the design people in one building, the engineers in another building, and the marketing people in a third building, right? And forget the maintenance people who had to build these things later. They were just like an afterthought. And as a result, cars were pretty crappy, right? When that paradigm broke down, and the engineers sat next to the marketing people who sat next to the people who wanted to design it, or at least much closer in proximity, instead of throwing the idea over the fence and making somebody build something that can't be built. How, in your experience as you're working with companies and clients, first of all, does that resonate? Do you understand what I'm trying to say about the division of functions? And where would you say, is there a realization in a significant number of companies of that problem? Or have we moved through it? I mean, what would be your assessment?
So this same problem, has been going on for quite a few decades, but is really becoming prevalent and problematic in the software world, in the world of information. When you talk about, well, we have to understand our process before we redesign our process, before we automate our process, then we have to maintain those. Each of those 4 exercises happens in different documents, in different systems, in different places, by different people. And so you've taken that same problem, you've made the problems more complex because there are more people and more systems involved, and you've separated all of that information with hard breaks of different systems and file formats in between them. And so this is one of the core things we've been kind of championing, working on for years, is it's not just about bringing people close together. Yes, virtually, physically, that always helps, but it's important about bringing that information closer together and have that life cycle be connected. Everything that happens has to be a connected flow. There has to be a consolidated way to look at all of that and see how it went from one step to another so we can trace it and ultimately drive better transparency. So it's very true, and it's always the case when you look to history, you can see problems repeating themselves, and it's the exact same problem that you've just mentioned, but it's been going on for years, and it's really prevalent now in the process and in the automation world.
Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add to that a bit. Brian Halligan, the CEO of HubSpot, a large, global marketing company, has this concept where you know, it's exactly what you're saying, where people tend to, the easiest thing that people tend to do is just think about their team, right? And then just the success of their team, you know, that it's, we're going to do this really, really well, and it's, I'm just going to work on our team, then that'll be good. And what he said was, instead of just thinking our team, let's think about the customer. So if we think about the customer or the client first, what they need, we'll tend to be reaching our goals better, and we'll tend to be more aligned. And that can do the exact same thing with RPA. You know, it's, people just tend to think, how can I make my finance department as good as possible? But if you think of it, how can we reach our goals and support our clients, the people that are using us, better, then you'll be more likely to be like, yeah, you know what, we need to involve other departments, or this alignment needs to happen. And it's the same thing at Blueprint. You know, we're a small company, but you know, with the pandemic, you know, people tend to just, that's the easiest thing. Oh, I'm on the marketing team, I'm only going to talk to marketing people. But you know, Matt and I meet every single week. I'm meeting with the product team right after this. You know, we work hard on making sure that we have that alignment, because it's super important in every concept, you know, not just RPA.
So I don't want to compare you guys to something that you won't catch the comparison on, but after that mess that I described in the auto industry, we got the Ford Taurus, which was one of the most reliable Fords ever built. We got the Honda Accord, one of the most reliable Honda cars ever built. We got the F-150, massively, the Ford F-150, which is obviously, if you're an American, it's the most bought car in the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
The quality, performance, and price characteristics of all three of those were exponentially better than what preceded them. And what I'm hoping, and I see Blue, you know, I literally see what you guys do. I see what Blueprint does and say, you are the potential bridge to that kind of performance with business processes, et cetera. And the companies, as I started the session off, everyone's on a journey. They're either going into the Amazon or going across the desert or going up Mount Everest. And they need the right pick, axe, tools, guide, mentor, and Sherpa. And I don't know which one of those you guys want to be. I'd call you Sherpas. That'd be my, I'd say Sherpas with a great tool. How's that for the analogy for the day? Look, we are out of time. We're going to take a 15-minute break for the next session. I want to thank you guys. Every time I hear you, I'm inspired by what you have to say. I can't wait to see more and more of this rolls out and more companies benefit from what you guys are capable of and what you're currently doing. And if you could just, one wear a polka dot shirt and one wear a striped shirt, it'd be fantastic on the next call I do with you.
I'll put a wig on next time.
Thank you very much. Everybody join us back in 15 minutes, top of the hour. Thank Matt and Matt for a fantastic session and information. At least I thought it was fantastic. I hope you did. See you all in 15 minutes.
Take care, folks.